Imagine finding out that the lawyer who negotiated your tribe's biggest deal in history was secretly on the payroll of the company sitting across the table from you. No vote, no warning, no way to undo it. That's not a hypothetical. That's exactly what happened to the Hopi Nation in 1966. And it set off one of the most devastating resource battles in Native American history, a fight over coal, water, and survival that didn't fully end until 2019. This is the story of Black Mesa. Black Mesa is a dark, high plateau in northeastern Arizona. The Navajo call it Zilyigian. It sits on land shared and disputed by both the Navajo and Hopi nations. Underneath it lies something valuable in two very different ways: massive coal reserves and an ancient, pristine aquifer that had supplied drinking water to desert communities for generations. In the early 1960s, American cities were exploding in size. Phoenix, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, all of them desperate for cheap electricity. Coal companies went looking for the easiest, cheapest reserves they could find, and they found exactly what they wanted underneath Navajo and Hopi land. In 1964, Peabody Coal signed a mineral lease with the Navajo Nation. 2 years later, in 1966, they signed a nearly identical lease with the Hopi Tribe. And this is where the story turns dark. The lawyer who negotiated the Hopi lease, a man named John Sterling Boyden, presented himself as the tribe's own legal counsel. What most Hopi leaders did not know was that Boyden was simultaneously being paid by Peabody. The man hired to protect Hopi interests was working for the other side the entire time. The leases that came out of those negotiations were staggeringly one-sided. Royalty rates were locked and low and stayed that way for years, even as coal prices climbed. And buried inside the fine print was something almost more damaging than the coal terms: the right to unlimited use of the region's water. That water came from the Navajo aquifer, known locally as the N aquifer, a source so pure and so central to life on the mesa that it fed the springs families and livestock depended on for generations. Peabody needed a way to move coal hundreds of miles to the power plants burning it, so they built something almost nobody outside the region has ever heard of: a coal slurry pipeline. Crushed coal, mixed with aquifer water into a liquid slurry, pumped 273 miles through a buried pipe to a power plant in Nevada. To keep that pipeline running, Peabody pumped over 1 million gallons of aquifer water a day. Not for drinking, not for crops. To move rock dust through a pipe for decades. 2 mines opened on the mesa: the Black Mesa Mine, feeding that slurry pipeline to the Mojave Generating Station in Nevada, and the Kayenta Mine, sending coal by rail to the Navajo Generating Station near Page, Arizona. At its peak, this operation pulled around 14 million tons of coal a year out of the ground. And here's what made this so hard to fight. For the Hopi Tribe, this single mining operation eventually made up 75% of the entire tribal government's annual budget. For the Navajo Nation, it was closer to 40%. Around 300 Navajo and Hopi workers held some of the best-paying jobs on either reservation because of these mines. A deal built on a conflict of interest had become the financial backbone of two governments. Fighting the mine didn't just mean fighting a corporation. It meant fighting your own tribe's budget and your neighbor's paycheck. That same tangle of land and coal fueled a second crisis. Overlapping the mining leases was a long-running dispute between the Navajo and Hopi nations over a shared piece of land called the Joint Use Area, centered on Big Mountain, right in the Black Mesa region. In 1974, Congress passed the Navajo-Hopi Settlement Act, splitting the land and ordering thousands of families off land newly assigned to the other tribe. Roughly 12,000 Navajo people were eventually forced to relocate, one of the largest forced removals of Native Americans since the 1880s. Some elderly residents refused to leave for years, facing down federal agents and fencing crews in a standoff that made national headlines. And critics have never let go of one uncomfortable fact: the land being cleared sat directly on top of some of the richest coal reserves Peabody wanted next. For decades, resistance never stopped. Lawsuits, protests, tribal council fights. In the 1990s, a federal judge even revoked one of Peabody's mining permits, ruling that regulators and tribal officials had ignored the rights of the people living on that land. Peabody appealed. Mining continued. The real turning point came down to water. By the early 2000s, Independent studies confirmed what families on the mesa had been saying for years. The aquifer was dropping, and springs were drying up. In 2005, both the Navajo and Hopi tribal councils passed resolutions banning any further use of aquifer water for the Slurry pipeline. At almost the same moment, the Mojave generating station was ordered to install $1 billion in pollution controls or shut down. Its owners chose to shut down. With no plant left to sell to and no water left to move it with, Peabody closed the Black Mesa Mine in 2006. Environmentalists called it a victory, and it was, but it came at a brutal cost. 300 jobs vanished overnight, and the Hopi government, so dependent on coal money, took an immediate, massive hit to its own budget. A win for the water, a gut punch for the economy. Both true at the exact same time. The Kayenta mine survived another 13 years, feeding the Navajo generating station near Page. Workers and tribal officials defended it, pointing to 1,600 jobs, direct and indirect, and tens of millions in annual revenue funding schools and roads on some of the poorest reservations in the country. Critics kept pointing to the same unresolved problem. Two nations, still economically chained to a single, aging industry that had never fairly paid them for their own land in the first place. In the end, it wasn't activism that finally closed it. It was economics. Natural gas and renewables got cheaper through the 2010s, and by 2019 the Navajo generating station simply wasn't worth running anymore. Its owners shut it down. The Kayenta mine, its only customer, closed with it. Final coal shipment, August 2019. The plant went dark for good that November. The Hopi Tribe lost roughly $12 million overnight, about 80% of its entire operating budget, gone in a single closure. 350 miners lost their jobs, most of them Navajo. Towns like Kayenta and Leases, built around 2 generations of mine and plant employment, watched their local economies contract almost immediately. And the land itself? Still healing. Large parts of the original Black Mesa Mine remain only partially reclaimed more than a decade after it closed. Peabody has repeatedly sought extensions on its legal obligation to restore the land, even as advocates point out that reclamation work itself could employ hundreds of former miners for years if the company moved faster. So what is Black Mesa really about? Not coal. It's about a lawyer who worked both sides of a table. It's about a tribal government whose survival got quietly tied to a single company's bottom line. It's about a boundary dispute that just happened to clear land sitting on some of the richest coal in the country. And it's about an aquifer pumped for 40 years to move powdered rock through a pipe so that lights could stay on in cities its own people would never live in. The mines are gone now. The power plants are torn down. But the questions Black Mesa forced into the open about who controls a nation's resources, who profits from them, and who pays the price when that profit disappears are questions indigenous communities across this country are still living through today.